There's a saying, I'm paraphrasing, but it goes like this. Don't die with the music left inside you. And I think about that often. I think about all the hard drives in the world filled with people's ideas that are just sitting there. No one's reading them. They're not in the world. They're not inspiring people. And my wish for you at the end of this conversation, if you would like to write, if you would like to be more creative and create something, whether that's a song or a piece of art or a piece of poetry, you are inspired with this conversation that I have with Philippa Davies. I first met Philippa many years ago, and she was a mentor, really, for me and my business partner. We had a coffee with her and realised that she is really quite special. We had a business that we thought was incredibly unique and realised that Philippa was doing it in the 80s. She has got so much insight around creativity, and also she's a little bit of a rebel as well. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Philippa, who is a writer, a psychologist, a speaker. Oh, she's many things, but an incredibly impressive human being. Covers it as well. I'll hand you over to me asking her the first question, who showed her how to live.
Well, I would probably say my dad, rather than my mother, who sadly was kind of plagued with mental health issues. But my dad was just always encouraging and supportive and, wanted my brother and I to see life as a big adventure. He came from an extremely poor background. So his mother was known in Carmarthen as an peg because she'd had polio, and so she limped. His dad played the violin in the pubs and sort of died when he was in his 40s. And Nell had these 3 kids that she brought up, and she was, well, you'd call it vintage these days, but she was very proudly a second-hand goods seller on Carmarthen Market. And she'd go with this cart from a tiny little house, with a toilet outside twice a week to Carmarthen Market with all these clothes on it. But she was also incredibly glamorous. And so she'd have sort of mink stoles and Max Factor carmine lipstick, and she had 2 daughters and my dad. And I think my dad was totally the apple of her eye. He was in the war. He was a very young RAF officer. And then when he came back, he started working in local government, and he kind of worked his way up, so that he ended up being the only bloke only person actually in Britain at that level, a sort of director in local government, who'd never been to university,
Wow.
But he was really into education. He was mostly in the education department. And when we grew up, he'd come home from work about 5:30 or 6. And then people would start arriving at our house, kind of people whose kids wouldn't be an obvious choice to go to college, but my dad would have heard about them and he would help them fill in the forms.
Wow.
So, he was really very kind of community minded and everything. And when he died, too young, kind of around about 60. There was about 300 people turned up at the chapel, and all the different denominations in the town asked if they could send their ministers and their priests, because he was so highly thought of. And we didn't realize that. He didn't realize it when he was alive, So he was a very loving, caring dad, and also quite liberal. I mean, I remember him asking me when I was about 15, had I tried pot? And if I got some, was there any chance he could sample it? So, for sort of the director of finance of Carmarthen education department. That was pretty far out. So, and he always had interesting books and interesting records. He was really into people like Martin Luther King and Mahalia Jackson, and lots of cool stuff, really. So so it was my dad. That's a long answer.
No, it's a beautiful answer. He sounds like a really curious guy.
Yes, he was. Yes, I mean, yes, he was. In Wales then, I think the chapels were kind of how young people sort of get together and met each other. And there was also something called the Workers' Educational Association, which sort of was like kind of night classes now, or adult learning. So he was very into all that stuff, and he really, really believed that education was the kind of thing to help, remedy social injustice. And he was really, really keen on kids from, obviously helping kids from poor backgrounds get out of Carmarthen and go to colleges and stuff like that. So he would probably have described himself as a liberal, and my mother was a communist. So they were interesting combination.
Interesting dinner time conversations.
Yes. Yeah. But no, he was a very gentle soul, So,
with a lasting legacy.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's any, my brother and I have both gone on to kind of probably get too many qualifications that we need and everything, but we absolutely love education, the whole idea of it, I think. And that's down to our dad, so yeah.
Love the learning. So apart from education, what are your other loves?
Well, I love my husband, who I have been married to for 44 years, which is
congratulations,
pretty good going.
Yeah.
I love my kids, one of whom works in tech in the city, and the other one is a filmmaker and does widening access for Cardiff University. I love my dog, Ivor. I love, I've got a good circle of friends that I love very much. I have writing students on my Udemy courses, and some of them, I don't love them, but I get very fond of them because some of them, put a lot of work into the course, and I get to know them very quickly, and they open up during the course. And then it is lovely to see what happens to them afterwards. Some of them go on amazing journeys, So that's very gratifying, and it is kind of a feeling like love. I love the kind of creative arts. So I'm a volunteer at the Torch Theatre, Milford Haven, and I help out there a bit. I love swimming. I am nuts on swimming. And, I do that a couple of times a week, sometimes 3 times. I love cooking. I love reading. I love poetry. Yeah, that's it. I love Wales.
and Wales.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the Hiraeth at the moment, because being in Somerset. Yeah, I haven't been in Wales lived in Wales for 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, 5-6 years, yeah.
Gosh, Somerset's a nice place to be, though.
It is. I'm in Frome.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool and hip.
Yes.
And it's very lovely town and a nice community, lovely place to bring up children. It's as well.
Well, we love, we are both from Carmarthen originally, but we came back to Pembrokeshire, and it is fantastic here. I mean, it's just, we both like the water, so I like being on it and I like being in it. So we've got loads of opportunity for that. And it is a slow pace of life, especially with the 20 mile an hour speed limit. But the people, Welsh people, I love them. They are fantastic. And it's a slow life, but there's just piles going on, mostly of people's own making, you know. So there's loads of West Wales hippies down here really doing art and all writing and pottery and all sorts, you know, sound baths and all that. So lovely.
So with the writing, Philippa, I'd love to ask the question around. I know a lot of people whenever I'm coaching people and I talk about things that turn their light on and make them feel good, and a lot of people out there would love to write, and they just don't know where to start. And what is your tips for someone that's listening today and they're like, I really loved writing at school, but I don't do it anymore. Where would they start? What do you suggest they do?
Yeah, well, the first thing to do, which, you know, we're all very familiar with this idea these days, is to, I think, work out why you want to write. You know, try and get that down, but don't review it as though it's going to get published. It's just for you. Why do you want to write? You know, what is it you want to get out into the world, really? And then I think to think about what are the things that interest you most? What writers do you like? What are the photos of in your smartphone? You know, if you take, most people do take photos, what are they of? Do you hope to write for financial gain? And if so, you need to be very realistic about this. So, you know, as said, my students, a lot of them have a dilemma. They would like to earn a living through writing, but they also, some of them have a great message they want to share with the world. And that you sort of got to opt for one or the other, I think. So I get students who say, I can't find my niche, you know, and that's often because they're trying to work out, well, I hope to make money out of writing. So my niche needn't necessarily be what I love. So, you know, should I look at niches like tech or like the health sector, which are growing and have got demand for writers? I mean, it is very difficult these days, really difficult to make a lot of money out of writing. But I think if you're creative and you really love almost any subject and you want to, you know, dive down into it in a really detailed way and explore how it can go sort of across platform. So it could be a podcast, could be, well, like you've done, Georgina, you know, you've got a podcast, you've got a book, you know, you've done media. How can you do that? That if you're good enough and enough people connect, that is the word, isn't it, about writing? If enough people connect to it, you may be able to monetize it. So when I think about writers I know who have been successful over a long period of time, then I think of a guy who actually lives in Wales but has never written anything for Wales, but about Wales, but he writes about astronomy. So whenever there's an eclipse, this is kind of topical, he will publish guides across the UK in different states about where's the best place to see the eclipse and what equipment you need and all that. And as a result of that, and this is he is really nerdy and passionate about astronomy. But as a result of that, he has picked up really big jobs of writing white papers for tech companies where there are people who are all share his interest in astronomy and have thought, well, if he writes that well about astronomy, he can write a paper about our software or about our service or our type of tech, you know. So he balances those two things. And then another person I think of, Victoria, she's a travel writer. And her stuff is always I feel she's writing for me. You know, if I went to Paris, I would like those kind of really good value, lovely, charming, unusual restaurants that she suggests, not flash stuff, but kind of interesting, but bohemian, you know. So, and she's done loads of travel writing as a result of that. I mean, when we were doing a mentoring course, myself and my friend Manjula, she's also a psychologist, we were hired by Cardiff Uni for a few years to help grads. And we had a wonderful girl there called Casey, who came from Ely and wanted to become a food writer. And she'd got a blog. She was also working at Admiral, subsidizing it all. And she plugged away and plugged away and plugged away. And now she's a really top food blogger. So I just think, if you really love something and you're prepared to put the effort in, man, you probably do need to use, social media or things like that. You need to network a bit, stuff like the NUJ. I met some of these people, NUJ courses, National Union of Journalists. Then you'll cut through, I think. But your heart is obviously going to be in it, but you've got to put the work in, and also I think keep remembering that as well as a writer, you're creative, so you can think creatively about putting different stuff together, unusual combinations. So I think it is really interesting what people can do. I don't want to sound like a boring mother, but one of my sons is part of a thing called the Paper Whales. So they're all 20-somethings, and they decided there wasn't a magazine that had their rather anarchic view of Wales. So they were going to make one. They weren't going to put it online. It's giant-sized. It's a couple of foot high, and it has 100 pages. They didn't think exactly how they were going to distribute it. So Di and I have sort of spent afternoons driving around Swansea and areas around Swansea delivering these bloody magazines. But it's something that that generation hasn't been doing in Wales, and now they've got support from the Books Council, so they're going to keep it going. It only comes out once a year, but it's like a big event when it comes out, and they all do cabaret and stuff like that. So they're going to do this for about 4 years now, and it's kind of got up and running. They need to subsidise it; they can't live off it, but it's something good that people have been prepared to invest in, So I think, remembering that you are creative, and I also think it's boring, but upskilling. So, what we're doing now is hardly, a big deal, but we've both upskilled to make podcasts. And I think I don't know if you found this, but I found it's quite a steep learning curve at the beginning. And then you're running, really, it works. So I think, it's the old thing of keeping learning and keeping on top of it.
And trying everything. And yes. And I like what you said about not putting too many conditions on it. It's like, I need to do this, but it has to make me money. And it's like, well, that's a big ask. It is a big ask when you don't know how it's all going to go. It's just about, I think creativity is just such a beautiful thing that you can do for your mental health, your physical well-being. And it's something great for your heart. And to just do the act I always think of whenever, like saying yes to some things. I remember when I did Sing and Inspire, and that's how we met, didn't we? Many years ago. I'd never run a choir, but I was asked to do I was singing teaching, and I was asked to do a little child's choir, and there was only 15 children in it, and I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And then from that, years later, I'm doing events with 300 people, teaching them a piece of music in a couple of hours, So I think it's about starting small and just making them little steps.
And giving it a go, I think. I'm really keen on the idea of us as, we're explorers and experimenters. So, if you were just starting out writing and you're thinking, I love horror, I love cooking, I love politics or whatever, just write for each one of those a couple of paragraphs on why I want to write horror, why I want to write politics, why I want to write about cooking. And then at the end of it, ask yourself, well, now which one of those came easiest and which one did I really struggle with? So you can run little tests like that all the time, can't you? And kind of, be your own best experimenter in a way. Which one makes you feel kind of energized? I mean, I know, people make lots of jokes about stuff like sparking joy, but there are things that we do that make us feel really energized and good. And, why not try and get as many of those into our lives as possible, really?
Yes.
I mean, I think the other thing is, and I sometimes think this, but it would be an unkind thing to tell a student. Some people just aren't meant to be writers. They don't have that kind of coming out of them. Do you know what I mean? And you can be very quiet and still have a sort of you want to do that. But some people really like the idea of the life of a writer. They kind of think it's sort of, you've got freedom and you can be a nomad and all that sort of stuff. But actually, it is mostly about, a lot of writing is incredibly boring. You're sat in a chair, or, if you're good, you'll have one of those standing desks, but you're keeping your bum in the chair and you're keeping your fingers moving and you're churning the stuff out. So I personally, I feel I'm a bit old for them anyway, and other people should have a go. I don't enter competitions much, but I love online writing challenges, where you sign up for a month. It's usually about 20 quid, and you write every morning during the week for a month. Those sort of things. You meet lovely people, and they just keep the bum in the chair and keep the fingers moving. So it's that sort of thing, really. I think good habits, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, and nowadays there's so much opportunity with technology. If you feel like the blank page is tormenting you, then just use voice record and interview yourself about it. What's the most exciting thing about my main character? Why do I love this particular spice? Why should people vote for this party? Just interview yourself and splurge out the answers. And then you've got you just do it with Google, can't you? With Gmail, So you just get some voice notes down, and then you're not working with a blank page.
Yeah, so I think sometimes I can be a little bit guilty of just putting some stuff in ChatGPT, and then it's not a back page. Then it's a white page, and then I can go, all right, okay, that gives me something. I can have a little fiddle around with if I have to do like a bio or something like that. Sometimes it just gives me a little head start.
Yes, yeah. Oh no, definitely. ChatGPT is very useful.
Yeah.
It at the moment, although Elon Musk is telling us different at the moment, I don't think you get that human element and sort of human spark in it. But for brainstorming, it's great.
Yeah, it is what it is, isn't it? Yeah. And I think for me, being dyslexic, it's been a very valuable tool.
Yes.
It has been a good tool for me. So I do enjoy it. A lot of the podcast is about sort of where love is. And a big part of the way that we love and how we learn love is how loving we are to ourselves.
Yes.
So how loving would you be? How loving are you to yourself?
Well, I think I'm pretty loving. I mean, I am. People have told me in the past that I'm a bit eccentric and things. So I think I probably am a bit eccentric. I certainly do get fixations on things, And that's probably why, in my earlier, I got 12 books published when I was younger. And I was really fixated about finishing them all, and I would actually not sleep very much towards the end of finishing a book because I'd be worried that I would forget it all, and when I was, so I would definitely fixate on a subject when I was writing a book about it. Which, in the idea of kind of having a balanced life, I don't think I was really good at that, but I think I've felt very fulfilled, And I mean, fortunately, as you know, writing, you can be at home. So while you might be thinking about your book, you are still physically there for the kids. Even if they're saying, oh no, not beans and fish fingers again, mum. Now, I'm not retired. I sort of thought a couple of years ago, I'm 67 and I am retirement age, but I don't feel like retiring. My courses are extremely enjoyable online, and I only take very interesting work in terms of psychology. So during lockdown, I worked for the port boss down here because they were running, Milford Haven Port is huge and very significant in terms of gas coming through to the UK. So I worked for the port boss and his team, supporting them because they were running the port online, which was like a massive learning curve because I think about ports, but incredibly interesting. And I got, we developed very great, close relationships with each other, because they all at one point or another were, pretty vulnerable in what they were doing and what they were having to deal with, because they were not precedents for boats, ships coming in with people with COVID on them. There's all different countries' laws and things like that. So that was a very, that was a very interesting job, and I was kinder to myself in doing it and having a bit of stress from it than if I'd said no. I look after myself in terms of, because I'm mad on this swimming, that I do much slower than most of the people I swim with. So I think that takes care of sort of looking after myself physically. I'm quite disciplined about my work, and I like to carve it up into small tasks. But in between that, if I want to go and see the show that Michael Sheen just did on telly, where a crowd of autistic kids interviewed him, because it's just had the most amazing reviews. So probably today, around about 5:00, I'll watch that, So I think, yeah, I mean, because I'd like to have, who knows what your old age is going to be like. But because I'd like to try and optimize the chances of it being okay, then, I do look after myself and love myself. But what's interesting in writing, I think, is that and a lot of creative work, like, painting and pottery and all that sort of stuff, is kind of when people get over themselves. I think you can be very hampered by needing to tell your story and not thinking about how it connects with other people's. Writers, you can take a license, can't you? Even if you're writing non-fiction, which is supposed to have some sort of truth in it. I know other writers who've written stories about themselves, but they've made that a third person because they don't want their ego to be in it that much, So I think that's the real stretch for writers, is how do you really connect with other people and their needs, and how do you really, really empathize with people while keeping your distinctive point of view and your own voice, so and it is, I think we have to be honest about it. It is ego that makes us write. We've got to think, well, there's something I've got to say that's interesting enough that other people will want to respond to it,
Yeah.
So the core drive is definitely your ego, I think. But how do you then kind of pull that out of it and, make a wider connection? That's what really brilliant writers do, and of course they're not always happy bunnies, So I was reading about Ernest Hemingway, he's a kind of very romanticized but amazing American writer who killed himself, and there's so many instances of people like Dylan Thomas, who Dylan Thomas, an incredibly self-destructive person, but also absolute genius of a person. So that is interesting, I think, I mean, I also think we shouldn't judge people who might decide they're going to have a shorter life, but a particularly full life of, whatever it is that they really want to do to the max kind of thing. So
Yeah, each to their own, as they say.
Yes, yes.
So where in the world do you think there's a love shortage?
Well, it's in loads of places. Since COVID, I think it's still taking generally in the population, people are still needing to recover from it. And while it's really great that we're talking a lot more about mental health now, there are some really serious issues in mental health, like vagueness of diagnosis over things like autism and ADHD. And sometimes it seems like everybody is an amateur psychologist or, everybody has got some form of neurodivergence. So, um, and I sometimes think some of that is actually because people don't feel loved. It's kind of like, oh, I've got to have something that makes people be nice to me. So I'm going to attach something to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
That's not to detract at all from people who, are very genuinely experiencing these things. But I can definitely think of instances of people that I know whose kind of career to date could not have been sustained by what they claim they now have, kind of thing. Or maybe it's just developed, but it seems really unlikely. But they would like a bit more love, So, I mean, it's all that silly stuff, isn't it? Like, never say stop, sorry. Those guidelines, like, never say sorry. That's ridiculous. Everybody cocks up. Of course, we should say sorry. There is a human being who hasn't needed to say sorry.
Yeah.
And just kind of, being a little bit kind and considerate to people in saying please and thank you and stuff like that, just having a bit of respect, I think. I can think of places where, particularly when I've worked as a psychologist, where those sort of those sort of things have sort of slipped out of the culture, I mean, you kind of get it. When everybody's firefighting and sort of taking themselves terribly seriously as a savior, they can often then run a bit of a narrative of, well, it's life's what I'm doing is much too important to say hello to somebody or how are you doing today? or please, could you do that for me? Or thank you. I haven't got time to appreciate other people. My mission is so important. And it's that sort of stuff, I think, where we're missing love, really.
Yeah.
It's just years ago, I did some work for the Millennium Centre, actually, up in a school in Troyderrhyw, which is, near Merthyr. And we were taking those words that are on the side of the Millennium Centre in Cardiff, in these stones at the horizon sing. And the kids had digital opportunities to rewrite them. And I was phoned up before the workshops. They were first year secondary school and told, don't expect them to be first year secondary school. These are kids who, treat them like they're primary school kids. And I went up and these kids were full of beans, and we had to give them some Dylan Thomas, and we could have given them poems, but I thought I'd do Under Milk Wood, and I particularly would do the schoolmaster trying to poison his wife, which they absolutely loved, and many of them had on a continuous loop. And then they went to create the stuff, on the digital signs, and some of their work was brilliant. But I realised in the room that some of them were never, ever, or very rarely given any feedback. So my mission in the session was really to give an individual comment on every kid's work, and that took quite a long time. But I could see these little faces, who'd been sort of avoiding eye contact and get really cowed, lit up when you said something positive about what they'd done. And one of them was an absolute genius. I'll never forget this, because they wrote, smile because you won't always have teeth. And I thought, that would be so great, beaming out on the square in Cardiff Bay. This is genius. So it's just a little bit of acknowledgement. And latterly, I used to then, because I was a STEM ambassador, go in and do app design for kids in schools. And again, I'd find in some now, app design is very collaborative, and they can make the apps about anything they choose. So if they want to do contour makeup or, a boy band or whatever, they can do that. But in some of these groups, you'd have, very withdrawn, clearly troubled kids. And again, it was about they just wanted a little bit of feedback, a little bit of, hey, you are doing great here, or I love the way that you've contributed. So I think that sounds like a very watered down version of love, because it's not a grand passion or anything, but it's a sort of, it's a small love and it's a significant love, isn't it? And it's kind of happening every day, and we can all do it to each other. So that's what I'd say we could do with a bit more of it, really.
It's about being nice and kind, isn't it? And they do sound like such I don't know, like small incidentals, but you saying, I see you, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's not about, and it's about, I'm listening to you, I'm valuing you, I see you. And you're important for this moment, you're important.
I have to say, in this school, I mean, they were fantastic, the teachers and the head. They're incredibly appreciative. But also, what the teachers had done, the English teachers, they had papered. The classroom was incredible, because they'd got loads and loads of book covers and papered every single inch of the wall in these book covers. And when I was in, I thought, bloody hell, this is an act of love. I think they'd spend a weekend there, the whole English department. And it was so wonderful for the kids to be surrounded by all that stimulus and inspiration. Yeah. So you do get it, don't you? But it's it often gets weighed down by other stuff, like certainly in teaching today, the demands of admin and everything else, and getting ready for inspections and stuff like that. So in society generally, I think it's those kids who are born without advantage. They're the ones who really need the love, don't they? So
brilliant. I've only got one last question now. Okay. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, it's lovely to chat.
It's really, really lovely. And the last one is, when has love conquered all?
Ooh. Well, actually, I will flow into this answer from what I was just talking about, because whenever I see him these days on telly or something, I think, oh, God, I wish he would come back. So President Obama set up this amazing children's project in Harlem and took, a group of kids whose parents were junkies, really. And the kids were taken to the project, first thing in the morning, and then returned last thing at night. And they had an extremely visionary leader called Jeffrey somebody, I forget his second name, is an incredible guy, incredible speaker. And this project ran for a long time. They pumped loads of money into it. And sort of 8-9 years down the line, they were able to track the kids' progress. And the kids, of course, were progressing perhaps a couple of years above what the national average would be across the states. And so they then replicated it in lots of different places. It still cost loads of money, but those kids were being given just a chance, really. I mean, I don't know with the political situation, having been with kind of Donald Trump and all that, whether it's still going. But if you to the sort of the New York Children's Project or the Harlem Children's Project, and the videos are really moving and really inspirational. And that is love conquering all, I'm absolutely certain none of those people who worked on that project thought things like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, I need to clock off now. They were all on this amazing mission. Well, they knew what their why was. It's a cliche thing again, isn't it? But they knew their purpose and what the outcomes were. So I think in instances like that, and people do pull together to do amazing things. And when we saw it during COVID, didn't we? We saw the sort of best and worst of people, really, that that people can be, extraordinarily resourceful and heroic when they're working together. So that's when I think love conquers all.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's that example, I think, is really, you can just see how everybody worked out what they needed to do, and they just were all wanting to give these kids a chance.
Yeah, I just I don't know if you've read the book Poor by Catriona. Oh, what's her name? O'Sullivan.
Oh, I've heard of it, I think.
Yeah, it's been number one or it's in the top 5 in the in Ireland for quite some time because she's Irish.
Yes,
Yeah, it's a fascinating book, and she grew up with 2 a heroin addict parents, and she's a professor. She writes lots and lots of papers and speaks all around the world about the link between opportunity, poverty, and how you're written off as a child in poverty, and how much, what does disadvantage and being poor really do to you?
Yes, yeah. Well, it's very, oh God, well, I'll definitely read that. It sounds right up my street. But when Madjula and I were doing this work at Cardiff University, we had a fantastic guy who had got a first in civil engineering from Uniglam, University of Glamorgan, but he was sharing a flat with his mum in Rumney and very frustrated that he couldn't get a job, just when we were deep in recession. And one of the things we used to ask the kids about was how did they network? And he said, I've no idea what this means. And he'd done things like he'd led an expedition up the Matterhorn. He's hugely impressive, this guy. He said, well, I don't know what that means, really, So we sort of explained to him a bit. And then we came up with this idea of guerrilla networking. So what he would do is, there's a very big structural engineering company in Cardiff Bay called Arup. So we would go there and watch what cafe people went into when they came out, and go in there and order, a glass of water or something, and then say to people, oh, I'm trying to get into somewhere like Arup. Have you got 5 minutes? When they were sat down with their sandwiches, some people said, off.
Yeah.
And others said, oh, yeah, because people often like to give advice to a keen young person. Oh, yeah, I'll give you some tips. And he was repeatedly told, well, we're not hiring, but these people are. And he moved around a bit, and eventually he ended up with 3 job offers on the table because he just wasn't getting near them, because he didn't have a clue about, and he didn't have a dad or a mum remembering that their second cousin was in engineering or anything like that. He was completely on his Todd doing it. So I think that's a sort of an invisible side of poverty and being disadvantaged, isn't it? That you kind of, you feel like you're on another planet some of the time.
Yes, I think it's something that I can't completely understand because I've not experienced it. But reading that book it's not normally my cup of tea, them kind of books.
Yeah,
but she writes beautifully. She writes with so much heart, and she's really opened my eyes to the advantages I've had, and she helps you see the world in a different way. You're different after reading it, and I think that's the mark of a good book, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Oh, well, that's a great recommend. I'll get it now on my Kindles.
Yes, yeah. And I listened to it as well. She's got a nice speaking voice as well.
Right, okay. Oh, lovely. It sounds great. Yeah.
Oh, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, they've been really, really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, well, lovely to talk to you. I really enjoyed it. And seriously, if you do want a cup of tea or whatever when you're down, just give me a shout, okay?
That's a lovely invite. Thank you very much.
Take care now, Georgina. Bye-bye.
I hope you're feeling inspired. I hope you're feeling all buzzed up and ready to be creative. I love that. I love what she was saying about smile, because one day you won't have any teeth. And yeah, that's a good message for all of us, isn't it? One day we won't. And to live today and not to die with our music inside us. This has been another lovely episode of Love Shortage. If you would like to send me any feedback, I'm on Georgina at georginajones.com. Until then, share the love. Bye.